global crickets. Really, global crickets. What are we going to do to stop this nonsense? It's not going to be crickets. It's not going to be the silence. It's not going to be feeling content. This is not my plan. This is the plan we were born into. And so we either accept that that's the way it is, or we ignore it, and it runs us down. It's that simple. And I just come here every week to try and show you there's things in the world you can be told of, you can be offended by, and you can take action on. A whole lot better than what I think we've been doing over the last 2 decades. Well, most of the people that listen to me have only been listening since the Internet's been kind of coming on in the last, decade? Very few of us are really from 3 decades ago, maybe farther back than that rolled up our sleeves a bit, really just offended how this thing has been rolling out. And it has been rolling out, which has been it's a self-evident proof once you finally really realize it. This is not a game, and they don't mean us well. They'll tell us that they mean us well, but they don't. And then I came on to this aspect of what, more than anything else, would allow us to understand how and what mechanism is being used. And that awareness allows us to then approach what the problem is that we see, in my mind, at least in my actions, apply an application a whole lot better. And where we may have failed before, we have a different result today, but you're up against the innate, transparent crime against all of us. And so it's not so simple. It's not so easy. No war ever is. Thank you for tuning in today. This is BTWRLM261. For those of you on Prodcast, Recast, Pastcast over at UCY.TV, over at RLM, you hear it on the recast or the podcast there, on the replay, on the blogcaster. And again, all the people that are sending this out, in particular on YouTube, where I think we're being checked down over again by YouTube. You'd think about it. We're not being cut off. As I told you, we'll see how long this is going to go, how we keep coming under the radar, if you will. Normalization of ignorance is out there to help us out. UCY has their things, RLM has theirs at YouTube, so we're still out there. And I don't know that anybody's really being monetized with all our content, but that's the finance. See, they think, I guess you maybe do or do not appreciate the fact that I, if you will, divorced money, if you can say it, divorced the financial aspect of this a long time ago. I knew going into it, the finances is how they control you. Your financial future would be how they control you. Even on a website like Minds.com where they're going to tokens, everyone thinks this blockchain is something that's cool. I'm telling you, it's the tool of control in one way or another. And they're even going to that there. You would think it would be a non-dependent type platform. No, they're going to go into it. And they're going to force you to do certain things. And for those of you that I understand as I look at it, and I don't fully understand it, they haven't got back to me on how I'm not so unique no more, and they're going to fix the problem for me as a second-class citizen on Minds and not wanting to take on a monetary gain. The tokens still work, and your contributions by clicking and reminding. In fact, those of you on Minds, and you listen to this after the fact on the podcast, jump over to the page, web page of Minds, and put remind. And you can get out where I can't. You can get the word out for me. While I cannot get much return now as interacting with the website to get bonuses to eventually start to promote the content even better. So I don't know, again, not having a phone now, the concentrated e-file, I told you a long time ago what that thing is all about. It's now part of even the mindset of those supposed red pillars, those independent, those non-dependents, the alternative. No, it's not. It's all part of the PSYOP, and we all bought into it. And we're all kind of dependent on certain aspects. This broadcast is dependent at least on the interweb existence. What I'm asking you is be careful how much sticky stuff you get involved with. Maybe mimic yourself like the spider looking for a victim. So come behind the woodshed. I try to show you all the stuff that is out there for you to do, that you can do. We're not helpless. This is a fantastic tool, but it's going to take an integrated response. And here, one of these integrated response may not be happening. This is a very real chance right now, as I understand it, that freedomsnetwork.com, a little bitty social network for like minds, I suppose, or people that are coming together to try and work things out, it's going to go down. Last I heard, there was not very many, if any, if maybe one donation. And thank you for that one. For those of you that are interested in that, you better look at what it's going to cost Someone has to pay the server bills, and right now I think it's up around $360. And I saw one post that you're looking for a fancy bell and whistle about having some kind of a scale. I guess that's an incentive for people, but in 2 weeks or so, 2.5 weeks, that network goes down. And so if there's no contribution to the networks, they go down. And this is the other financial strain. Not only do you not get it, you're going to have to cough it up. So those of us that don't have more to do, even if you have a couple moths in the back of your pocket, that moth has some value. Kick it on over. It's not going to help you. If it isn't going to help you, kick it on over to a place that needs the help. So, a word to those that may want it and use it. Freedomsnetwork.com will definitely be going down, and that'll be one less place to be speaking, and you're going to be now forced to be doing what those that have the platforms that exist are demanding, or you won't participate. Like I'm finding out, I do believe that I'm now put into a second-class status, second-class citizen. So, enough on that. Just we better all get together, start supporting each other. Stop the division. You don't agree with what I'm saying? Fine. Come up with a better answer, but tell us what the better answer is so that we all get a better, faster way to get at this. As I try to show this every week to show you, it's right here for us, folks. Everything is right here. The information is, none of this stuff happening to us is a secret. It may be in coded language, but that language can be found. It won't be found by you looking in 1,000 dictionaries about what you think the language is. It's going to be what those authors of that language in that jurisdiction, in that action, in that movement are actually using. You don't go into a place where they talk about ebonics and put your dictionary language into that society, that culture. It's not going to happen. So that doesn't clear that up. I don't know what to say. You have to go into where they're coming at you. You got to find out what they are doing and what that language is saying, and they'll tell you everything they're doing. This is not even a secret. So I've taken a new tack. In fact, I talked about it. We got some things coming down. Just so much stuff right now. Really, really overwhelming my mind about how to keep up with it all. But it's all a matter of just slowly working through all the points, and you have to do that. And I've asked you to start thinking that way, because it doesn't matter where you go. You don't have to take on any big giant wrong to make right. You can take on whatever wrong you need to make right, but if you approach it in certain ways, and that way is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. You formalize your thoughts, kind of settle down. Like I say, set your desk up for success and move on through. It can be done. You've got to take a task to heart, to spirit. You got to take it into action. More important. And I hear it again over and over. I know it's a euphemism. I know it's some statement that it's so easy to roll off the tongue that knowledge is power, but it's not. I'm telling you, it's not. Knowledge is not power. You can sit all your vast knowledge sitting on a rock, contemplating your navel, does nothing in the world. Well, for those of you that work in the esoteric, maybe it does a little bit. But you aren't going to get much done in the things that are harming people around you. When someone doesn't believe in what you're doing, contemplating your navel on that rock, and they want that rock and want you off of it, you're done. And so, we can go ahead and play games in our head. Or we can go to reality. And if you're not dealing with the reality, and you can call yourself whatever you want, but you're going to be the same so-called snowflake relative to your unreality. You're going to be just as much a snowflake to the reality. And something I was hoping would be the principles of which would be conveyed in the concept of being behind the woodshed. And again, I want to remind you, understand, it's not me putting the lashes on you. It's you understanding what the woodshed was and bringing those that are the miscreants in your life to the woodshed, and you put the lashes on them. Oh, you open a can of whoop-ass. So don't underestimate what I've been trying to do to bring you into a power that we don't have to take this anymore. We just have to understand what they did and how they transferred it over. One of the big things that I just talk about, again, don't have the time to really cover it all, but it's how they affect us. It's how you're watching them destroy our quality of life underneath the banner of quality of life. I ran across this thing having to do with this vaccine issue. Now, some of you may not be interested in the vaccine issue, but some of you that are systems people, that are cause and effect type people, that are researcher type people to look for the real internal truth that's being convoluted, I think you all will be interested in this one. This captured me up a bit. I wish I had more time for it. I think someone's done a fabulous job to pull some things together with all the information that's available surrounding, in this case, aluminum, And they touch on lots of other things too, this guy does. I'm going to give him J.B. Handley. He's got a son, I think it says. He's got autism now. So he's on a trek. He's on a quest. He wants to know what caused this. What did it? They want to know about the part the mother and the father played. They want to know what the part of the medicine, the industry plays, the profession plays. They want to know about this thing that their son has this problem. And he goes through a proof here that I was just, I'm asking you to do this stuff and whatever thing. If you go in and you really know the subject matter, you find out what it's about, and you start to come up with a better and more plausible activity than all the denial that goes on, all the experts that try to deny or try to disprove or whatever. This is my mind was saying when I was reading it, this is just a case, an example of one man going out with a drive and really bringing it to the next level and providing a lot of foundation for a better way to explain what's going on. And what I found interesting is, I told you some of this stuff isn't going to be a direct consequence. And he's showing, we'll call it a theory. His theory of how this all works in these vaccines to harm people, through the vaccine, through the aluminum, is really an interesting, biologically supportable systemic condition. It operates in ways that are just now being understood. In fact, you'll see it. The science hasn't even been able to look at this. They didn't even know about these mechanisms since like 2006. It's the kind of thing I've been asking you to do with the wrongs against you. Stop listening to the noise and all the stuff you're told and really bore in and find the problem. I don't want to raise the level too, I guess it gets a little off point. Remember I told you, in the mining law and the miners and the grantees being violated by these laws that came down through a certain method and process. It wasn't, let's say, the moratorium against miners in Oregon that the Jefferson Mining District sued to enjoin. It was the leverage funding that popped up to give all that stuff life. It was the finances that it was the first thing on the list that we sued. We didn't sue to stop to enjoin the moratorium as the actual core. We sued the mechanism that appropriated the funds to implement what they were using. It didn't mean the moratorium wasn't part of the injunction. What it says is that we went after the money. The leverage funding was the clue to me, and that's what we moved when we saw that come out. I told you all about this, how this worked. The point is, we knew the system, we knew what we were after better than a surface treatment. And we went after the thing, the cause that animated the problem. And this report on this autism cause has that feel for me, and I'm taking some time here. I'm not can't go through it. It's quite a read. I took the time I did. It's not really in my field of action, but I wanted to understand what this theory was, how they worked this down, and the support is I don't know how you're going to refute the support. All the links are there. One of the doctors they used was actually in that movie I asked you to go see in one of our blogcasts, a link that's no longer available. And so I now have a little more context about his contribution, which is massive in this whole thing. International scientists have found autism's cause. What will Americans do? I looked at that. Yeah, what will Americans do? What will you do with this to help yourselves and those around you on a theory that science is just now coming to terms with? A fascinating journey this guy talks about. 5 clear, replicable, I'll get the word out, 5 clear, replicable, and related discoveries explaining how autism is triggered have formed an undeniably clear picture of autism's causation and possibly ways to alleviate the symptoms too. Most of the research that was created this understanding has been published in the last 36 months, and largely from international scientists in the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Israel, and China. The American media, public health authorities, and Autism Speaks are silent. So this gentleman, J.B. Handley, goes through talking about aluminum as being the causative factor. Remember a gentleman, Dr. Exley, Dr. Chris Exley in Keele University was in that one documentary, and he's like the global expert on aluminum toxicity, and he didn't even have answers for these kinds of things in the documentary. Well, he since has come on with quite a bit of study that's now showing and caused what the studies that he did, what the experiments they did found changed his whole idea about the causative initiation that aluminum creates. And they found a novel way that it happens. It's not that the aluminum gets injected and it does its thing. There's a whole biological, I told you, life is wondrous. The creation of keeping itself healthy is pretty fascinating. It actually, and aluminum is so foreign to the body. Aluminum is bound up in silica. It's not something that life has been exposed to typically. It's not something that there's really maybe any mechanism about. So the body just handles it as it would any other particle. Well, the problem is the way man has adjusted this aluminum structure, it's made it so nanoparticles have made it so small that it's small enough that the body's defensive immune system can handle it, but it doesn't know really how to handle it quite correctly. And interestingly, when you read through this document, you'll find that the natural immune system response actually aids in the problem of the autism, aids in other things too. We're talking autism here, but you're going to find it extends over to other things because of the way this works. A really fascinating dynamic. In other words, this gentleman, Handley, he started looking at all this and started putting the pieces together in we'll just put the word plausible, in a plausible way. Whether or not it's completely provable to those that would deny him, I don't know. It's not that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying this guy is showing you an example of how you go about tearing down the walls, building back up what the truth is, and then you lead with that truth, and you're supported 100% of the way by what you've done, not what you were told, but what you were able to pull together. And this is you cannot be knocked off that. There's no way you get knocked off that. That's what I've been telling you about all these years. You're going to have to come to dethrone my belief, if you can call what I have a belief. You're going to have to come with a lot of proofs, because as you come at me, I'm going to be qualifying everything that is said, and I want you to have that power. I know the power that I have. There's not many people that I can even hold a good conversation unless you're going to agree with what my research has found on the particular subject matter that we might be talking. In fact, we're going through a condition right now, looking at letters that I've written in defense of our mining claim almost 10 years ago. They're still holding water. How can that be if they couldn't hold water if they were wrong? And this is on concepts that I've now learned way more on, that we had the principle about then. It wasn't plausible, it was what was supposed to be. And this is what I'm asking you to step up into your own power to start doing. This is not just critically thinking. This is really looking into stuff and digging out and having to discern quite a bit. And this report goes through, see if I can cut through this kind of quick. It's going to be a little bit short. I'm going to get to the end. We'll talk about things that they've now come up with that you can actually do something about, because aluminum is, because of the way it gets deposited by the immune system, the macrophage, it's very difficult to get rid of in the body. The body thinks the cells, the macrophage, think it needs to put it there. The macrophage becomes the Trojan horse. Your own immune system becomes the Trojan horse that deposits this aluminum past the blood-brain barrier, where when it comes in such amounts, the body has these natural defenses called granulation. Literally binds it right there where it's injected. But when you give it in such quantities that it's nanoparticle and lesser than what the body triggers the body handles it like a foreign substance and go deposit it. These little garbage men called these garbage cans, biological garbage cans called microphage. They pick it up and will carry it and bring it to a spot. And they found it goes in the brain. It goes right to the brain. It goes right to the blood-brain barrier. It's not the actual thing that causes it. It's the fact of it's being collected up. They also found in this report, they asked the question, well, how then are we causing the problem with vaccines that do not have aluminum? And you have to look at, just like I told you, lay down a chronology when you're doing these studies. The chronology is ever so important. And by laying down a chronology and then putting on when the MMR vaccine, which is a live virus, it has its another type of thing. The adjuvant in that is the actual attenuated live virus. It's actually alive, which I don't get, but that's what they're doing. And that causes this immune system response, which triggers these macrophages to go and pick up all the aluminum in the body that was put in the injections prior to it. So it's been found to cause the triggering The immune system triggering is what the problem is. That if you didn't have this happening before, if it didn't trigger before, when you dump this live virus into a body that's full of this aluminum from prior viruses, if you weren't genetically predisposed to have a problem, it will cause the mobilization of the macrophage to pick up a lot of the aluminum and deposit it anyway, as if it was an adjuvant. So there's I guess my point on all this is he has looked at this, he's set up all the information, he's laid it out to come up with a more plausible reason why something's going wrong than all the denials around him. And he's using authorities outside of himself to do so. Let me read some of the stuff here if I can go through. While the aluminum content in each of the 5 brains of the people in autism was shockingly high, it was the location of the aluminum in the brain which served as the standout observation. The new evidence strongly suggests that aluminum is entering the brain in an autism spectrum disorder via the pro-inflammatory cells which have become loaded up with aluminum in the blood or the lymph, much as has been demonstrated by monocytes at the injection sites of vaccines, including aluminum adjuvants. These monocytes are the macrophage. These are the little garbage can cells that eat up bad things and have a system of chemistry in it to destroy these bad things. Well, aluminum's not something that it actually knows to destroy by enzymatic antics, so it goes deposits it somewhere. Again, all of this, maybe the information on exactly why or how may not be understood, but they know it does now happen. This is information that wasn't known. The connections between the immune system and the neural systems were not even thought to be connected. That in 2006, I think, Dr. Patterson, you'll hear all this in this article, identifies this connection that was never even known to exist. And this is what they start to pull all these men, it's brilliant people pulling this stuff together, not into being anti-vax, anti-this, anti-that, not anti-aluminum, not anything. Trying to say, what is this mechanism? And again, you may not be interested in this, but this is an example of what anything that you would be interested in driving into to bring the truth out, the actual truth. And as I said, my mind goes to Clint Richardson, just digs this stuff up and talks and writes and puts all this stuff together. And like I've suggested, he gets the thing dug out and he gets you the point. Now, what you're going to do with that and properly do with that might be a different point, but at least he goes in there to dig you up exactly how this stuff works. In that small area, and all this stuff is a subject matter specific, so you can't get too broad unless you can do the research to actually extend it out. So this is what goes on in this. Again, I guess I'm really fascinated with this article. This guy pulled all this stuff together for you, all these links and things. Why is aluminum in vaccines? They explain it. It goes through the whole thing. It's point for point how this works. He actually points out what I told you before, that the thimerosal, I said, don't forget about the mercury. If they got you focusing on that, that's not the cause. That's what's been happening. And he actually points out that even though the mercury can be seen as a toxicity, in the vaccine, it doesn't work as an adjuvant. It works as that antifungal preservative, it keeps the fungus down, antibacteria. It's not its function to be an adjuvant, so it's not a part of this system. And so, looking at it that closely, he's actually able to cleave mercury from the problem. As I told you, don't integrate the thimerosal, because that's really not what's going on here. We have all these other things going on. Remember, I've done these broadcasts before. I'm also pretty satisfied with this study because he goes through and he kind of explains. Confirms the things I've already told you. So you're going to find, those of you that have been listening long enough or can go back and find those broadcasts, you're going to find my statements very consistent with much more authoritative findings. All right, mine is just an observation of certain things based on certain conditions. This is for those of you that really want to get in and stop the nonsense of those people that will take a color of authority and literally harm others, harm you with it. And I've told you could have more than I don't want a vaccine in your mouth. When you start going after you show the causation of harm, and you then tie that to a liability. Well, here's the causation of harm. Are you going to sign and indemnify me against harm for you injecting this if you do this? Is a dangerous position because you're agreeing to take it, but if they won't, that's kind of a big indication, isn't it? And So you go, again, you don't just walk into a doctor's office and say that, you prep it, all right? So the point is that you still hearing that doctors won't indemnify anybody for their harm. Their action, not the vaccine immunity, but their action. You got to be setting back a bit. And as I tell you, read the data sheets. It'll tell you all you need to do in a nutshell. But this gives you the internal point of a mechanism of how the aluminum adjuvants, notwithstanding they're toxic, but not that they're toxic on their own, is there's a systemic system. There's an immunological, neurological system that gets invoked that becomes and triggers this causation. And I go on, and it's quite a bit of information. I don't know how I was going to deal with it, but let me go through a couple of discoveries, just entitled maybe the first paragraph. Hopefully give you some information on the different aspects of potentiality, if I can say that part, of how the causation begins. The first one in discovery that they think that he's done, I say think that he's done. I say take this and you reprove it. He says it's replicable. You become the scientist and reprove what he's done, and don't leave any stone unturned on any misinterpretations and holding out things that maybe not be. You do that study, that big study for him. You back it up if you're interested. To me, this is a big, interesting example for you to teach yourself how to do this as well. The number one discovery is maternal immune activation can cause autism. Well, while Dr. Patterson, this is the one that makes the initial finding in 2006 between the immunological system and the neurological system, he finds that this is a triggering system, and it actually extends into the mother. And the whole point here will come down to the fact if you trigger the immune system, these macrophages will transport the aluminum to places that it will be a problem in your life, in someone's life, yours or your little ones or your friends' little ones or whoever. While Dr. Patterson's passing wasn't something I was aware of at the time, it was certainly recognized by the scientific community with an obituary. Dr. Patterson's research focused on the interaction between nervous and immune systems, a connection that was not universally acknowledged in the early days of neuroscience, explains his obituary. He became intrigued by epidemiology. I see these words, my mind says they're going to say it, and then it don't. Epidemiological. I'm going to stop there. Studies. It's not going to be a word I'm going to get today, and I don't know why. I said it last night, and I was rereading it for all this stuff. That had linked to severe viral or bacterial infection during pregnancy with increased risk of women giving birth to a child with a neurodevelopmental disorder such as schizophrenia or autism. Think about this. Now we've jumped into appearing psychiatric problems. Patterson and his co-workers reproduced this human effect in mice using the viral mimic that triggers an infection-like immune response in the mother, producing in the offspring the core behavioral symptoms associated with autism and schizophrenia. So you can read more on how this works. It goes on and on. He makes this connection. This is discovery number one, and it all starts to fold in as you start to put into a potential. He's looking here. You'll find the different steps where, well, again, anytime you trigger an immune response, you trigger this capacity to migrate whatever, but in this case aluminum, to places that it's not supposed to be. Further refinement of discovery one, immune activation from cytokine interleukin 6. If you're an autism parent, you probably heard the expression cytokine storm and half understood what that might mean. Anything with storm at the end can't be good. What this really means is a chronic, slow burn inflammation in the brain. In 2006, Dr. Patterson and his colleagues were speculating that the immune system's cytokines might be responsible for altering the brain development of the fetus during gestation. So again, we have a pre-birth time of potential activation here. Again, you can read they go through and talk about it. The quote, they give the documents, they quote out of it the important parts that he wants to point out here. They talk about this cytokine interleukin 6. It's IL-6. Is critical for mediating the behavior of transcriptional changes in the offspring. So it goes right to a core thing inside of development. it's triggered and in an adverse way. He figures this out, or at least he points out the paperwork that shows these things do occur. They're not an idea, an opinion, and they're replicated, and they're repeated and they're replicated. They're found in different places, and those are replicated as well. Maternal infection during pregnancy is associated with an increased risk of schizophrenia and autism in offspring. Now, the question then becomes later on, why were we giving pregnant women vaccines at all? Because here, if you just trigger the immune response, you have the ability to move these poisons, toxins to places that they become toxic. The body can't deal with them. They create other things that are becoming more of the problem. They go through, again, what causes the activation. Discovery number 2, aluminum adjuvants. And remember, the adjuvant, they had a description before. You get all this in the writing. It's the thing that causes your immune system to respond, and it helps to extend the utility. In fact, if it wasn't there, a lot of these things would not actually be functional. They are irritating your immune system. The problem is that very initiation of the immune system may be the motive problem. It causes this natural response, which then is not good, ends up not being good. Aluminum adjuvant causes immune activity and is far more neurotoxic than previously thought. Aluminum compounds, aluminum hydroxide and aluminum phosphate, are the most common adjuvants used in vaccines. They are currently used in the hepatitis A, B, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, DTaP, DTaP, or anyway, on and on. Influenza B, human papilloma, pneumococcus vaccines. The aluminum adjuvant activates the immune system, which induces long-term immunity to antigens in the vaccine, but not permanent now, just long-term, and this is the other problem. So then you give it another injection, and you inject the system with more of this. So they're finding that this is a fact. They discuss here at this point the macrophages' movement of these aluminum nanoparticles from the body into and through the blood-brain barrier, and they start to collect it up in certain spots in the brain. Again, I don't have the time to go through this. Again, it's a lot to read, but I think it's very valuable to read. They explain, it gives you in your mind more than, no, I'm not getting a vaccine because they're just no good. That tells you there's a mechanism. And I'm thinking if you understand the mechanism, you'll understand, like they point out, we got schizophrenia that's involved. You're going to find out as you read through this that more of these, like interleukin-6 causes other things that triggers other problems in other types of people. And it all can be down to genetics, but not necessarily so. And they prove that in the MMR live vaccine, which has no aluminum adjuvant, but can still affect people. And they found out that it was because that the granulated aluminum and the injections, of large injections that are given early on, are captured inside the injection point, and once you stimulate that immune system sufficiently, the macrophage will go there, pull that aluminum out from the past, and start migrating it to the bad spots in your brain and your lymph system to be continually supplied to it. So again, I'm just going through this list real quickly and rolling through. They go through a whole summary thing, lots of links again, as they go through explaining the parts that are important that he wants you to see, and focuses you down. I think it's important to focus down because you have a lot of these really technical papers you need to be able to cut through pretty quick without losing the point. Number 3 discovery is aluminum can increase interleukin-6 in the brain. And this interleukin-6 is problematic. They go through the discussion on one of the only frustrations and remarkable toxicity studies on the aluminum adjuvant coming out of France is that the scientists did not explicitly measure the mice brains for interleukin-6, which we know can be released during the immune activation event and also know is strongly associated by causing autism. And so we have a deficiency in the evidence that he analyzes, and then he comes up and says, but a study from the Middle East published roughly 1 year ago, how soon and recent this information is, provides a strong foundation for the interleukin IL-6 aluminum adjuvant connection. He goes through and explains all of this as well, and this is where more things are studied. And they're also talking about there's an inflammatory process, which is the body's response that's integrated with this effect, how this goes through. And so you're dealing with brains that are inflamed. It's like any tissue that's being inflamed. And they correlate this to, I guess there's some kids that have their heads are swelled. And can you imagine the pressure that's going on with this, as this body's inflammation is now going in to literally distend their skull. But so anyway, the mechanism here, they go through the that with all this and this interleukin-6 and what it gets triggered. Again, see, now you don't have, it's not the aluminum itself. So if you test for aluminum toxicity that way, or you test it by oral, not injection, but oral capacity, you don't even have the same test. And that's what the FDA or FCC or CDC, that's what their test says. If you do injection testing and what you lose is you measure it, that's good enough, but it's not. They're finding out this whole other thing. It's not just about not the injection or the ingestion. It's actually that when you inject it, it has a completely provable other mechanism that gets triggered. I'm talking about being triggered. Don't worry about the snowflakes getting triggered. This is the kind of triggering you're looking for. Those of you who want to help people that are suffering this, we're down to kids down to 1 in 38 now. They got this stuff. And this is part of my mind says this is the part of the future they want. They want you to have no capacity in you and in your, like I've told you before, you're a mother and father. You're just stuck with this problem. You're not going to run from it. You're not going to be functional in society. So this is a pretty well laid out attack, is my mind, and I'm hoping that somebody's going to, the time I'm taking here, gets interested enough to read some of these fascinating I know they're conclusions. They look like conclusions, but fascinating connections in a nice, tight way that can show you more than just saying vaccines are bad. It's not. I've told you, it's not about that. In fact, they show one here. That a vaccine has shown to be an advantage. Now, I'm not gonna say that's why you take it. What I'm saying is that they looked at lots of things here, and they qualified lots of things. They didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater just to prove it was no good. They looked at the sides they didn't have enough information on. They went to look for alternatives. They looked at the places that said, well, hey, how come in this vaccine we don't, with these two same type of setups, we have two different responses in the body? And then they look at that. So this is again, pretty neat to watch. And again, they talk about the neuronal differentiation in the prenatal stages, how this is triggered again. They have the steps on how this works out pretty clearly laid out now. Again, only in the last few years. So this is one of the bigger problems. All the regulations, they don't work within the last 6 years. It's going to take a while. It's going to take someone now to step this forward. It's going to take some group of people to work this out and get this thing changed so that we give the proper information to people that they can make the wiser choice, and we get the manufacturers to start doing things that are a lot smarter than what they're doing. They even offer a way to get around the problem, so that's not being adopted. Why, I don't know, but maybe it's the bottom line on everything. There's lots of companies involved in supplying a lot of this stuff together that are kind of, they're tied together, and the well-oiled machine is sort of hard to stop at that point. Discovery number 4, hepatitis vaccines induces IL-6 in postnatal rats. This is a study that they'll tell you can read about. So this cytokine IL-6 autism connection is repeatable in different ways from different vaccines. So we're not on the vaccine. It does a causation. It happens to mimic or be the same as some others, has the same symptoms. It causes the same outcomes. So at some point, we're not looking at the vaccine. We're looking at what the adjuvant does. And so I want to get people out of this, quit dividing yourself even within your own discussion. Quit trying to say, I understand that it's no good and that's good enough. There's people out there that are incapable of understanding this now, are incapable of actually fighting. It takes the yeoman's work of a father continually taking the time, having the ability to put this together. He's going to need a whole lot more help for any of you that are considering how this works. You got to have more than just they're no good in your mouth. You have to work this out so that you can see that they're willfully disregarding mechanisms that are not being addressed. And they're causing harms they don't have a right to cause. I could read, there's so much to read. I think here's the one that I wanted to point out, but I found interesting in this as well. There's another aspect to the point of this, but here's where two vaccines have different functions. One is detrimental, and one showed, at least in rats, it shows a benefit, surprisingly. An important new study by Li et al., is I think a Chinese study as well, reports that the effects of Bacillus Guerin, or BCG vaccine for tuberculosis and hepatitis B vaccine on brain development in infant rats. The study relates the observed brain changes of the type of immune activation, they got lots of letters here, stimulated by the vaccines. The BCG and Hep B vaccines had opposite effects on the brain. The BCG, or tuberculosis vaccine, being beneficial and the Hep B being detrimental. And the combination of both vaccines resulted in cancellation effects. This is the first study to test the effects of immune activation by vaccine on brain development. All other studies of immune activation have used essentially pathological conditions and mimic infection and induce a strong fever. A criticism I have had often from the vaccine advocates is that the immune activation experiments are not relevant to vaccines because vaccines cause a milder immune activation than injection of poly-IC or lipopolysaccharide, two types of immune system activators. This new study demonstrates that vaccines can affect brain development via immune activation. This is the key here in all of this. Hence, the immune activation experiments are relevant to vaccines. The Hep B vaccine increased IL-6, interleukin-6, in the hippocampus, the only brain region analyzed for cytokines, as the report was stated in the statement. And let me go back to this. So there you have it. Two vaccines causing different functions in the brain. They're claiming here that it had a cancellation effect. Okay, I guess. I'm not so sure. How do you have one effect damaging and the other one not? Is an interesting problem. If that's all you have to do to cancel, that may be the good way to go. And so you want to know that if you're going to take these vaccines too, if that's going to be. But let me point out something about the tuberculosis vaccine. I think it was Dr. Weston Price, a dentist, who did some investigation about Aboriginal peoples and why their teeth were so good. And he found out that tuberculosis, ultimately you find out that their teeth are good because they got a good diet. They've grown up in their environment and they know how to get what they need. And they have a good diet, which shows you what the problem is. Everywhere else would have to so-called fluoride your water to keep your teeth good. Maybe it's your nutrition. But otherwise, he found out also, I believe it was, that there was a very low incidence of tuberculosis. In fact, it appears that tuberculosis is caused by lack of good nutrition. And so that kind of put a little damper on this thing about that this benefits the brain, but in fact they say that it does benefit in a capacity. Don't know if it's any good, but I also knew that tuberculosis, in my reading and my experience, not that I've had it, but in my experience looking around and seeing how it happens, when you get to a place when your nutrition is good, there is no incidences of tuberculosis, and if there is going to be one, you can defeat it pretty quickly. And so we see here, just impliedly in this, that nutrition has a lot to do with certainly your resistance to all this, doesn't it? The natural resistance, not through the vaccine. Anyway, interesting observation that a vaccine could benefit the brain development in a certain way. But I don't know if I want to go that far to say that that's good. I just want to say this is the type of study that this guy has done. Discovery number 5, high levels of aluminum in autism brains. Early I mentioned in December 2017, study published by Professor Chris Exley, quote, aluminum in brain tissue in autism that found incredibly high levels of aluminum in the brain tissue of 5 people with autism. In an interview soon after his study was released, Dr. Exley explained, the amount of aluminum in the brain tissue was, I would say, extraordinarily high, very high. My group has measured the aluminum content of probably more than 100 human brains, and these brain tissues taken from the individuals with a diagnosis of autism were some of the highest we've measured, bar none. The only ones we've seen that are similar were a recent study of familial Alzheimer's. This itself is a very important finding. Professor Exley goes on to say, perhaps equally important, if not more important, were the I'm going to get these words. Microscopy studies enabled us to identify where the aluminum was in the brain. Maybe I got some aluminum in my brain. I got to stop chewing on the aluminum wheels of the cars that pass by the driveway. When you look at our brains of people with a diagnosis of autism, we found something completely different and something we've never seen before as yet in any other set of human brains. We found that the majority of aluminum was actually inside cells, intracellular. some of it was inside neurons, but actually the majority of it was inside non-neuronal cell populations. So we found that these cells were heavily loaded with aluminum. We also saw evidence of the cells in the lymph and in the blood were passing into the brain, so that they were carrying with them a cargo of aluminum from the body into the brain. This is the first time in any human brain tissue we have seen this is a standout and a yet unique observation in autism. For myself, it very much implicates aluminum in the etiology of autism. And so you can go on and read more of what he's got here. It turns out on a continuing discussion written by the author, it turns out that biological experiments using mice to gauge the impact of injected aluminum adjuvant were equally accurate when extrapolated to humans. And so they go through, again, this nice tight proof. Just keep rolling through. I'm just scrolling here. 5 discoveries and a clear path to autism. They go through and discuss this title. Quite a bit to read. They go through the questions, and I want to get down. There's a whole lot of information in the questions. I just can't touch it all. They talk about mercury here in the questions, but he talks about here that this mercury is not used as an adjuvant. As I was telling that to you. This is used as an antiviral, antifungal preservative, if I can say it that way, to inhibit that in the fungus itself, which tells you that they're not so pure at some level either. They want to perfect that as well. But again, they address the mercury. They address the fact that the MMR vaccine has no adjuvant. That's where they tell us that the MMR live vaccine stimulates the interleukin-6 and cytokine, and so that it just the live virus causes this enhanced reaction, immunological fire up, which then causes the macrophage to go clean out the aluminum from the cells it finds and transports it to the brain. And so you can, once you've had a lot of shots that have put a lot of mercury granulation in the injection sites, then the type of injection the MMR comes in, it stimulates the response for the macrophage to go and even look in those spots to pull that aluminum out. And so if you when you don't have any vaccine that has any aluminum adjuvant but can strongly stimulate the immune system, it causes the same problem. It's not the cause, it's the cause of the triggering for the same problem. And this is what I was telling you, that these problems are going to be not necessarily direct. It's not like you have a flame on your hand and you see you put your hand on a red hot skillet and all of a sudden you see the blisters. It's not like that. I've always felt, and we're seeing it here, proved here, this is a combination of steps that goes through, and it just happens to be that the body just responds in this way. The miraculous machine, this is the exception. And this is another thing we're going to find out about. The exceptions don't seem to work well in nature. So we got to be careful about those. They go through and talk about how this invokes a macrophage chemo-attractant protein. When this process happens, it causes the macrophage to go seek out these things. So these macrophages are they're programmed to do one thing, and they fulfill that program, and so they really aren't even to blame. It's just what they do, right? And I want you to tie that over to artificial intelligence. These computers, they just do what they're told. Simple little machine, but it can only do so much, and it goes on. And so they also now come to the end here. I'm going to get to the end of this part. Get the aluminum adjuvant out of the body. He goes through and explains what the best alternatives are here to try and do that. So you heard schizophrenia, you heard Alzheimer's, you heard you look at any interleukin-6 stress. You have all these any of the other things that you might see. You all too may be wanting to look at a dementia that we talked about last week. You may want to look at this triggering mechanism to see if you're kind of getting into this point, someone's suffering this, that these things that I'm going to mention just quick as a list here aren't something you may want to start to focus on. Number one is to get the aluminum adjuvant out of the body, and something you get from Dr. Exley, and you see this in the earth. You see the aluminum bound with silica. Apparently, the silica and zeolites are both considered possible ways to remove aluminum from the body. Will they also work on aluminum adjuvant? The author says he has no idea. However, there's someone that he gets information from, which you get a link to that website, who offers some insight as to doing that. And part of that is to drink some highly concentrated silica waters in order to do that to help that. Now, I don't know how that's going to get back to the blood-brain barrier. That's going to have to be an analysis. The point is that That's one of the suggestions. Consider ketogenics. I was incredibly excited to see this study. You got a link about the impact of ketogenic diet had on suppressing immune activation in mice. So you limit that activation source. You stop the depositing underneath the immune system stressor. Whatever that might be, whether that virus, bacteria, you just getting upset, whatever stress it starts that stress, you can reduce that response by going to a ketogenic diet. They also understood that they helped to reduce seizures. So there's a whole lot behind this that it does beyond just this little one. What we've talked about behind the Woodshed, your biota, your gut biota, and again, that tied into this glyphosate stuff, where your gut, you got everything's in your gut. It reduces everything, it changes everything, it sends signals it actually sends the signals in the lower intestine to the macrophage. Remember, we read all about, but they help the microbiome. We know that aluminum adjuvant can contribute to gastrointestinal distress. So now that we have a negative feedback, just right here alone, I can tell you that in the first sentence. But how do you feel that gut microbiome? And a 2013 study highlights the relationship between gut microbiota, immune activation, and autism. They have a study. You can go see how this works. So there's another support for what we've talked about behind the Woodshed about how you would start to help fight this. It's just a matter of diligently stepping back, looking at replanning, and then looking at that as your battlefield and attacking it the proper way. You do it improperly, you're going to lose the battle. Waste your time, spend lots of money fighting on something you're going to lose. Then they offer vitamin D. Vitamin D, this comes from the subsequent support website from this gentleman named VP, identified as VP. An excellent source section on the role of vitamin D can play in reducing immune activation, stating vitamin D strongly reduces immune activation of IL-17 production specifically. Vitamin D strongly improves many diseases, including almost any disease with inflammatory or autoimmune aspects. You've heard this behind the Woodshed. I've said this years and years ago. Vitamin D favorably regulates the immune system, simultaneously improving its effectiveness at eliminating pathogens and reducing inflammation. This is exactly what you want for optimal health, the combination of high immune function and low inflammation. When the body has adequate vitamin D, the immune system can eliminate pathogens without becoming dangerously overactive. So this is a hyperactive immune system that's causing this problem, and the little macrophage are doing their darndest to help out, and they're not quite, it's just not something they were so-called programmed with to do. It goes on to talk about more about it. Number 5, what you can help is selenium. Now, we talked about this in the context. I said, even if you have mercury in your body, selenium is a aggressive binder to mercury. And, well, you can look at the science behind what the selenium atom is said to look like, and you'll see why part of that is. It's kind of like you just have to see what this is for yourself. I can suggest all kinds of things. You'll find out whatever you will. But selenium is something else you can take. I would offer be careful of the style of the thing. Sometimes they say that the yeast-derived selenium is good. More bioavailable. Otherwise, I don't know. We've got to look at that. I'm not sure that which is the best on this, but you want to raise your selenium levels. It'll start to bind with heavy metals that it likes to bind with, like silica likes to bind with aluminum. Why you find it in the Earth's crust? It's because when it was created that way, it bound up really quickly, and it became balanced, inert, and it's not really it's not available to fast chemical reactions. It's a stable connection. So we got a couple of minerals here you can throw in, countering mineral excesses, aluminum and mercury. So that was the 5 things they do. I think I'll end it here. You can read more. I hope I didn't bore you to death. I hope I give you some insight. But this is my point on for you is this is a fascinating study. What this guy, what the work this guy did, father did to try to understand. He's not completely they don't have it locked down, but he's certainly got now the pathway to start to understand this a lot better than has ever had before. One man doing this work to tie all this together. Could be you in any other aspect, any other field, or maybe in aid of this, and in taking this, like the baton, I keep telling you, let me put the baton, I'll hand it to you, you run with it. Come to me with what you want to run down the track, what race you want to run, I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can put together for you. And so let's move on now, more health things, and how the government has it wrong, and the system of the government somehow I don't know why we've allowed it to be here and why we were crickets against it. I didn't know about it. I've been part of that too. It's not like I got the answer. We've allowed all this caucusocracy in every aspect to rise up around us. I guess we like sitting in the caucusocracy because that's all we have around us. So none of us turn around to try and wipe it off, get out and wipe it off of us and stop it and not have it happen. But these systems, and I now understand them as the consensus process. They don't necessarily come by this name, but you see them you seize them when you knows them when you seize them, folks. It's all about the Lieber Code when you come down to it. That this is the occupier coming in. You just have to notice it, and like I said, you got to stop it being transparent to you. These federal programs that came on, you always wonder why they're like the war on drugs makes drugs worse. Well, that's what they're there for. There's a whole business behind that, how that works. We see over and over and over how that's supposed to be, and none of us quite get it enough to put it together. That I can just suggest part of that was done for us in 2013 when we sued the Bar Association, the political parties, the function of the lawmaking process that interfered with foundational things in our nation, the United States of America. We identified this method that I see directly. What I would keep talking about some of this stuff in this war on drugs, and we saw the DARE program. We saw now that last week we heard they're pulling the pot down from being a gateway drug. Well, today, actually it was coming out, I couldn't get to it. It comes out right on the heels of that. 9 major studies reveal DARE program actually makes drug problem worse. And I wrote, I think, somewhere, that's the joke. Early on, they brought the DARE program on, and all I was hearing was, well, I wouldn't even know these drugs existed. In fact, those mushrooms look pretty neat. And so they were under the auspices of trying to fight the war. They're actually aiding. See, they make you familiar to things that you weren't really doing. That was only one of the criticisms. There was lots. But now apparently there's been 9 major studies that reveal this program did exactly what I always thought it was set up to do. Just Say No, DARE, educational programs. They're all there to expose you and desensitize you. And it's worked. And if we haven't seen that, I don't know what more to say. So but here's the study. You want to see it. You want to start tying together these so-called authoritas that make a statement in an official capacity, in a public comment, or to inform somebody, to make some law on you, make it legal for them to beat down on you. Here's the evidence that you can use to go help stop it. I say help because I don't know if we're going to stop some of this stuff. I just know this is the method that they use. It just happened to come a different way. It didn't look so obvious like I could show you consensus policy. But it's the non-intuitive condition of how they gain the power. And so we see many, many years later, it's actually the causation of the problem. Here, folks, anybody, there's it is. It's an evidence for you to move on to do. Now, so here we have government getting involved, always seemingly doing the wrong thing. Well, just because you don't understand the agenda, and once you start to agree that they did something, whether or not you agree with what they did, you can cut right through quicker to see, well, what's their agenda then? It looks totally insane. But they don't do it because they're insane. There's a plan. And their plan is our problem, typically. And when government's on the leading end of it, you know it's probably a big problem. And here we see no evidence again that this whole, again, the global war, the war of the world here, the spread of Wahhabism was done at the request of the West during Cold War, says this Saudi prince in the news, to show us again, we could be duped about all kinds of stuff, and these gears are put into these levers and are pulled, and gears are put into mechanisms that continue over time, even when they're no longer needed. You see that right in the first paragraph here. The government will do what it wants, no matter what you think. These people, the caucusocracy runs the place. We were supposed to be vigilant to stop it. We haven't been. Now we give up. We throw our hands up because there's nothing we can do about it. Well, that's all they want. But here's the more evidence. For those of you, I told you the carnival mirror that we look at in the Middle East is what they're doing to you at home. These are long-term offensives against their own people. We know governments against their own. What the memes? How many memes have I seen go through? You take away the guns, and we have hundreds of millions of people die in every nation over history. That's it. I mean, it's just that comes at us in different ways. But right from the lips of the allies of destruction, the Saudi-funded spread of Wahhabism began as a result of Western countries asking Riyadh to help counter the Soviet Union during the Cold War, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told the Washington Post. Speaking to the paper, bin Salman said that Saudi Arabia's Western allies urged the country to invest in mosques and madrasas overseas during the Cold War in an effort to prevent encroachment in Muslim countries by the Soviet Union. Did you put that together, folks? He added that the successive Saudi government had lost track of the efforts, saying, quote, "We have to get it all back," close quote. Bin Salman also said the funding now comes mostly from Saudi-based, quote, foundations, rather than from the government. So there's a nested distancing of the culpability in the foundations. You know, those are all this is like the NGOs and the philanthropies and all this stuff that's used to destroy people, hurt people and populations. But he says we have to get it all back. Get what back, folks? This is supposed to be happening when the Soviet Union didn't want the Soviet Union to encroach anywhere. The Soviet Union, we were told, died a long time ago. And this guy wants to bring this all back. So believe this is the truth. I'm not questioning that that's what's going to try and happen. But we're not dealing in the current time. This is like an old program just continuing to run right underneath our awareness. Now, you go ahead on one more point I want to point out here. The Crown Prince in the 75-minute interview with the Washington Post took place on March 22nd. Another topic of discussion included the previous claim by U.S. media that bin Salman had said that he had White House senior advisor Jared Kushner, quote, in his pocket. And he responds, he said it would be really insane for him to trade classified information with Kushner. Folks, these people are really insane. So, you got your answer. And he told it to you. But don't underestimate that this is happening on some entity that does no longer exist. And he just told you that this is what your life, this whole world is really running upon. And I'm going to tell you the ripples from that are everywhere. A lie is told and perpetrated, and they don't even care that the thing that started it disappeared. They're going to get it all back. And so, I would just contemplate that for a bit. I look at this stuff and it's like, man, we're just so screwed up on this. Oh, it's SCROOD for all you sensitive ears. We just don't quite see the mechanism. Leaked military documents expose the inner workings of Obama's drone wars. And I wanted to point out again, these are not good ideas that get fostered and encouraged. And no one, we're crickets to most all of it. And it's just, you see how this bad idea keeps broadening out. All these bad ideas from the past are being worked and fortified and focused and actually continue to implement, notwithstanding all the boogeymen of the past are gone. It's the future we want, and we're going to bring it all back. This is all what they tell us. What I've been telling you behind the woodshed that's on the agenda of what's going on. Drones are a tool. The old report. I just touch a base here for you, but drones are a tool, not a policy. The policy is assassination. While every president since Gerald Ford has upheld the executive order banning assassinations by the United States personnel, Congress has avoided legislating the issue or even defining the word assassination. So for those of you who want to talk about assassination, you're going to go into that jurisdiction. You're going to define assassination. It ain't going to happen because it's never been defined. The courts won't even support it. They'll go look at what you've given them the ability to now mess with the word. It's not going to be the way you say it. It's the way the one that's been given the authority to say it's going to define it. So your dictionary is useless here. But at any rate, this has allowed proponents of the drone wars to rebrand assassination with more palatable characterizations such as the term du jour, targeted killing. So here we see double speak or altered speak or a special speak, all doing the bad decision, advancing the bad decision that gets worse. This is all I just don't see a difference between whether this is overt killing people, changing the word assassination, or whether the willful agents, the agencies willfully disregard that they don't have the science, said they did. They have to see how best sciences hasn't worked up until just the last few years, and then they'll resist this new science. The actual people finally getting involved in the trenches and digging this stuff out. How this just doesn't work quite right. And then you find a cause. If you find a cause, now maybe you got a method and a plan, and that could be criminal. And this is where I say the bottom line. This is all about the bottom line, folks. This is really they wouldn't be so resistant if they were looking to not really harm people. But I've told you, license is permission to do an illegal act. Permits are licenses. When they get a permit to do something, I told you, the Clean Water Act is not an act to clean water. It's to authorize, sanction the pollution of water just a little bit. Just underneath your ability to get really affected by it. Whether or not you are actually is irrelevant. That's how they made the standard. They made it on all the science they didn't have, all the made-up science, pseudoscience. We see it's not even science. It's adjective policy lobbying. By name, it's just by an adjective. It's just a descriptor. Again, you can call, double word. The targeted killing is supposed to be assassination. That's the adjective part. They describe something as a condition, but it's a lie. It's just a cover. What they're really doing is this political lobbying, and they're getting their way. They get the future they want because they're in the game and you're not. But whatever it is, and I think there's lots of ripple effects. You can cut their knees out in certain spots, and I think it starts to tailor this. And until we get more people doing that, what I'm saying is like invisible to everybody. You can't see. It's ludicrous what I say at some point. You think I'm a nut because there's nothing going on. Well, it is going on, but it's not such a pervasive thing. These elements in the world, the caucus, the worst of the world, rising to the top and actually running the world, animal. These people are the animals, and when they come at you, they think you're an animal. This is how this type of works. So they have their own dialogue on how they've justified that, but it's unjustifiable. Justified only because I, whatever we do, let it happen and don't argue and don't make a formidable response. Well, we have our opinions, but we don't do more than clack, clack, clack on the keyboard. We don't pull ourselves together in the powers that we have in order to pull this off. We see those in the worst of the world getting away with all kinds of things, and now we're still in the Middle East here about a bad, this is supposed to keep Russia, the Soviet Union out of the Muslim world. And what do we do with that? We invoke this thing called Israel. And it's like totally unaccountable. I don't know if anybody's noticed it. It's totally unaccountable. Well, isn't that predictable underneath the NDAA? Indefinite detention. You're all a criminal globally. We're all extrajudicial. Now, they created so-called judiciary, but it's under the military thing. And then you get treated underneath that. It's the model that you don't understand you're underneath everywhere, essentially. Palestinian girls sexually harassed during interrogations, lawyer says. Well, okay, yeah, we hear that all the time. See how desensitized you get? 17-year-old Palestinian resistance figure Ahed Tamimi was sexually harassed by an Israeli, not an Israelite, an Israeli interrogator during detention. The girl's lawyer has alleged. The minor, then age 16, was arrested in December after slapping the Israeli soldiers who refused to leave her family's property during a demonstration in the occupied West Bank. She accepted a plea deal of 8 months in prison last week in a closed military court. Now, they go on to talk more about this inappropriate conduct and all that stuff. Do we hear an outcry, a functional outcry about this? Well, yeah, a lot of us are twittering, oh, hey, this is not right, stop it. But is there a real functional response? Absolutely not. The people that are doing this are actually the animals. Who does this to people anymore? But these people are doing it because these people that are doing it in the military consequence think that anybody else is a lesser. Okay? They don't see this girl, now 17, young woman, as anything but a lesser animal, when in fact the brutality is coming from the animal that no one wants to call out. The Israeli soldier, having nothing but an occupation. And what's that from? It's from this bad planning that has an agenda. It's bad for us. It's perfect for what the planners have been doing to try and keep the Soviet Union out of the Muslim world. That's one thread. That's not even all of them. Okay? That's just this week was the ludicrousness of this continuing, this king, supposed king wants to use that old objective, long since gone, to continue to justify killing people and destroying their lives and their worlds and their cultures and their traditions and their lands and all this other stuff. Another position here. Don't hear an outcry. Journalists succumbs to his wounds after being shot by Israeli sniper. Not an Israelite, an Israeli sniper. Gazan video journalist and photographer Yusar Murtaja killed by Israeli snipers despite wearing a vest marked press while covering the march, the Great March of Return on April 6, 2018. Now, we'll go through this whole thing. I want to point out something. It kind of it struck me a bit. First of all, we know there's a war against journalism and journalists. And you don't want to, and you certainly, if you're a debased army, you're going to take care of anybody who's going to speak out against your position. That would be the press. And that's what you're seeing all day. That's why the whistleblowers seem to have trouble now. The world is really under a bad thing. But I noticed something about, they talk about he was shot despite wearing a vest named Press. He was wearing that vest, but where he was shot was very interesting. He wasn't shot at the vest. He was shot where he was vulnerable, just to the side and below the vest. That takes a very good marksman and someone intending to do that. So we're seeing this intentional murder that goes on with a group of soldiers, a supposed group of people that want to call themselves a state, that are internationally known as occupiers, that are not accountable. And they're killing people. They're killing the people that would tell us what's going on, underneath a plan that's been going on to keep out to keep out the Soviet Union, underneath a plan that wants to expand the plan for Israel, which was just an imposition by the UK and America and the United States. That does want to displace the Muslim populations. That doesn't care that it's not just Muslim populations, but mixed populations of antiquity. They want to destroy all that in the people. That's what diversity does. They want to make a monoculture. It's a monoculture of nothing but democracy, which is mob rule. Whoever has the most power and the brute force will win. So, another thing, I was taken a bit by the targeted shot on this guy was in a place that his vest wasn't. And I don't think that was an accident. And that just shows a premeditation here, which is the quality of these types of mentalities that are in the world that will look to say they have a defensive position to take. Their security is only the thing that's important, and their security is the only thing that you see. And it may be to your detriment, and it will most likely will. And if you don't think that's the case, I've been telling you the microcosm or the mirror, carnival mirror of the Middle East is happening in the United States, right underneath your nose. All the earmarks have been here for now over a decade. Been talking to you about it for almost a decade. Since I've been broadcasting, and here it comes. I've been telling you this stuff, and now we see the proof of it. Supreme Court shields a police officer from being sued for shooting a woman in her front yard. If you don't think the military, the cops, are the Israeli just shooting wantonly people, they want silence, abusing people in their care in a condition that's military and not in a public and not for anybody's benefit, not for justice. If you didn't think it's over here in the United States, here's the Supreme Court decision. I've been telling you it was coming. It's now the fact. We're not getting around with this one. The Supreme Court on Monday shielded a police officer from being sued for shooting an Arizona woman in her front yard, once again making it harder to bring legal action against officers who use excessive force, even against an innocent person. Well, they didn't say it was excessive force. This is the problem. If you show any threat now, at all, what did I tell you the magic words do? The magic words, I fear for my life, are enough. I said earlier, it will be enough to have you dead. Now it is. It's a fact. All they have to do is say that. The Supreme Court's given that license. If you don't think we're in a serious moment now. Now they do point out that she had a knife, but apparently, in the facts of it, she wasn't actually threatening any of the officers, and we get a little bit of the proof of this in the opinion of the dissenting justices. Supreme Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and again, I'm not really giving any. I think all these people are criminals, but they're the only witness that we have. I'm going to have to use what they're saying. I'm going to have to take that with the authority, and because I think it gives us a point of departure on how we're going to have to start looking at this. Justices Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg said in the dissent, the victim did not threaten the police or a friend who was standing by. Why'd they say that? Because that's what, under a felony killing, that's what it requires, that you're going to threaten someone, the life of somebody, or injure them seriously. That's the use of force continuum, why they said that. Why they even say that is because there's a standard for it. The decision, again, so if you're not reading these things to understand why they say what they do, and in context of what the standard is that they're supposed to be actually pushing forward or keeping, you miss what I'm talking, I guess, you miss what I'm saying. You have to start identifying in all of these subject matters that you might be individually looking at particularly, You have to find the standards within the context of the discussion. Here they say they give you two right there, but they go on. The decision, quote, the quote, decision is not just wrong on law. It also sends an alarming signal to law officers, and the public. It tells officers that they can shoot first and think later. Just what I warned you was going to happen. You can't even be innocent, folks. It's just the problem. But there's another point that they go on to say in a quote that the court need not, and this is how they came to this, does not decide whether Kisela violated the Fourth Amendment when he used deadly force against Hughes. For even assuming a Fourth Amendment violation occurred, a proposition that is not at all evident, on these facts, Kisela was at least entitled to qualified immunity. Qualified immunity attaches when an officer's conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. Because the focus is on whether the officer had fair notice that her conduct was unlawful, reasonableness is judged against the backdrop of the law at the time of the conduct. Now, this is exactly what I told you before. I was asking some of you to step up in every place that you live, every jurisdiction, every county in this area, in this country. They just told you what you have to do is what I told you have to do. Qualified immunity attaches when an official's conduct does not violate clearly established statutory constitutional rights, of which a reasonable person would have known. So I've told you what, folks? You don't want to be a victim to this nonsense where I can fear for my life and kill you. That's my license to kill you. You better go down to where the policy is made. Remember, statutory or constitutional, the statutory side's only policy in every state. It's not law. You go to that policy or the local sheriff or cop's policy manual, and you make it unlawful for them to treat you like this. Otherwise, this is going to be your future. Now, it's now law, folks. This terrifies me a bit. How do you protect against some lunatic, some fourth D-grade mentality that has a chip on his shoulder, who may be on steroids as well, who don't like what you look to begin with, who is afraid of things flashing, and he'll see a flash out of the glint of his own glasses to shoot you as an excuse and say he feared for his life. It is not a good day for us. It's the day that I said would come, but listen. It's just a matter. There's so many of us that it's not going to look like they're calling the herd. But this should be a call to arms about how I told you solve this stuff. You have to get it written down. This occupying force is limited by the black and white that's written. Why you can't disregard what's written in black and white. It's the only objective basis we now have. Here's the proof. Moving on a little bit from that, in response to this, ahead of that, right after it, this happened like a week ago, someone named Scott Horton from the Scott Horton Show, which I do not know, I do not listen to him, don't even know what's going on, made it came through the Twitter. I always get dismayed a bit about what all these people that say something aren't saying. People aren't saying anything. They aren't telling you anything. They talk a lot, but not really say a whole lot. And I try not, I talk a lot, but I'm hoping I'm telling you a lot. Its response was, Supreme Court rules law does not apply to law enforcement ever. They may murder your mom if they effing feel like it. All right, that's how his response to that was. What have I been telling you? Expect this. It's not a surprise to me. He comes out, he's got a show, he's telling people, now he's upset, but see, he's not telling us why. He's not giving us what the response is. He's just upset by it. It just violates his senses, and probably rightfully so. I don't even want to criticize that part. It's not really a judgment against anybody. It's our response to this stuff. That response is not what's going to help us. And I responded to that. I don't even know if it's going to do any good. He never responds to me to tell me to even go to Hades. None of it. Nobody responds to this stuff. I asked this in my Twitter. Not sure what the dismay is at the Scott Horton Show. How many years have I said on my broadcast? And all of you all that have been listening to me can attest to this, that's been listening. How many times have I said that there will be a day when innocent people will not be able to surrender and be shot for no good reason by cops which will be protected. And I ask why? And what's the answer, folks? One very plausible, probable, likely proof is you live in an occupied territory, and hashtag it is written. Now, I've been telling you this stuff. I've given you two sources for the reason. There's actually three sources for the reason why this is. Why are people surprised, and why do they use language that has no purpose, effing? I try not to use the language that has no actual, in this case has nothing, it doesn't contribute anything. Why do you respond out of an emotion rather than saying, uh-oh, we got a ton of work to do here, and then convey that to people? Is, I think, the big distinction behind the Woodshed that we need more people doing. We need to cut through this emotional, really, outburst, and it's truly horrendous. But that response is not going to help people in stopping what the two dissenting judges concur are how you stop it. So again, I'm offering in the context of this news they give us, the notice to us of what the reality really is, not what we think it's supposed to be, and not our consternation or our reticence about it or our pretentiousness about how we know better. No, this is how it really is, and you're going to have to come to terms with that if you're given the chance. The response to that, my little Twitter from Tessa, was hashtag, simply responding hashtag, blue is Blue ISIS. And I think I responded to her saying, I think you got something there. What did I tell you about the confrontation, the view of the contortion of the Middle East being in the United States? What have I told you about the militarization, undercover, transparent use of things and mechanisms and entities that you are transparent to you for what they really do? And I thought that was astute. The blue is. And if we don't come to terms with that pretty quickly, more of you all are going to be finding out that's the case. In fact, I think there was some more. Now, I think it's going to roll out. I think there was already two things where the cops just show up and now just shoot you. It's a license, folks, to kill you. And this is and I'm just dismayed. I've been telling you this is the fact. You can argue with me all you want, but this is all written down. When? Way before even 2000, but more to the point of execution. Your execution after 9/11. When they said things had changed, there was no reason for things to change. But you better believe things changed. I told you all about this. This has all been said. And I'm telling you, I don't want you to worry. I don't want to be feared. This is for real. You better come to terms with how that works. That you are an innocent man or woman who one day may be the victim of some D-grade mentality that thinks his costume. Well, the Supreme Court gave his costume all the power in the world to kill you, execute you right on the spot because he feared for his life. And these people are, I told you, they're psychologically chosen to be the mentality they are. And I don't want to undermine any legitimate law enforcement capacity where they're actually serving people. But that's not what we see their actual job is it? And so we are in a terrible moment. The proof of which is now confirmed. We all knew this before. I'm telling you, I could predict it, and now we're at the day when there's no way to stop it, except if you step up, until you step up and make the policies that make the time it takes for them to have to be, it takes away the immunity unless they've done a couple of steps, and hopefully those are intelligent steps that take the time it takes in order to identify the real threat. The threat has to be real. Not in the mind of the cop. And I don't know how that's going to be working, but if you can understand how well they know you to get at the things that it's almost impossible to delineate in words, you are maybe starting to come to how sly and slick these evil geniuses are. And until you learn the standards about this, I don't know that you can come to terms with how that works. And I think any few people that I've worked with where we tried to, I think we did, we just have to get the right time and place to put them, where you're looking for making ordinances or legislation or policy, and you attempt to, and you're trying to write it so that it affects the point, you realize how difficult it is what they've made here to get around. And a lot of that is because of the underlying condition. They don't really need a reason. They have to state a reason, and then that's just given authority. Doesn't mean that it is. So we have to put the definition of what that is. Like they said, assassinations wasn't defined. You're now going to have to find and write and submit and enforce and get written into law the policy, the local police policy or the county, whatever, the sheriff policy. You're going to have to advocate and get enacted those definitions that no one wants to do. I've been telling you all this time. This is a constrained government, but it's only constrained by black and white. It's not constrained by your opinion of it. Laws, okay, so we have this continuum. They have the right to shoot you dead on the spot, but then they put there in their system. We know all about this stuff. I'm telling you, this stuff rolls out as a plan, and some of you are going to have to step up, or else it is going to be your future. A lawsuit reveals, okay, so it took a lawsuit to do the revealing. Lawsuit reveals the deadly out-of-state control free-for-all inside red state America's for-profit prisons. The Management and Training Corporation operates 2 federal prisons and 20 more state and local prisons around America. Previously, it has been censured by Arizona for its role in the deadly prison riots. Now the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center are suing the state of Mississippi over the violence, neglect, and rampant human rights abuses. That's international. Human rights abuses of Management and Training East Mississippi's correctional facility near Meriden in Lauderdale County. Now, we could read on and on. The point is, you see right there, it took a lawsuit to start getting this out, so you got to be in position to have standing to get the lawsuit. You also see that there are rampant human rights abuses, talking internationally. That's exactly why that kid wasn't going to be extradited to America, as a British court found are inhumane conditions in prison. How does that help you? Well, that gives you at least some foundation to start, for those of you that want to have a better future and not run it into the big American open-air prison, and then you have your special place in it that they put you because of all this license they have. You then move into the humane, so-called humane side, you animal, and you say, and you get now the proof, and for those of you that get involved or get wrapped up with this situation, when you go to, part of this extends to this plea issue, when you get wrapped up and they want to sentence you to these prisons, you identify whether or not these companies are involved, private, and you identify their bad treatment. You identify their censure. You list it. You bullet point it. And when it comes time to a plea, you make a deal before the plea that they can't send you to one of these places because they're inhumane. You start finding out the condition of the place that corporation called the court is going to put you in, what agreements it has, and you foreclose those as a possibility as a condition of your plea. When you get to your rights at sentencing, you state them there again, that they're precluded from doing so, and then you put a liability. And you put a value on that liability. And you start learning and put a word in your mouth on how you do counter claims and counter conditions on this whole corrupt system. At least, you say, well, it won't do any good. I don't know. All I know is if you say nothing, you're going to go into the place that's a violent, neglectful, rampant human rights abuse, even human rights abuses. And known globally. The same open-air prison that's happening in Gaza, the same soldiers over there that are not getting any accountability are the ones that are privately in these prisons, and privately is actually, when you look at the corporate side, privately in these courts, in agreement, public-private, with them to harm you. They're not supposed to put you in a system and not allow a system that allows that. The punishment is not supposed to be the confinement. You're not supposed to be punished when you're in confinement. The confinement enough is to be the punishment. Somewhere that principle got totally thrown under the bus. You're going to have to assert it. Here's where the natural consequence of your lack of vigilance starts to come out and be shown every day now. Every day. I'm way overwhelmed and trying to keep up with it. I told you it was coming. I'm done. It's just, there's so much to say and point out to people, and I just see not a whole lot of action. Some of you that are, I really appreciate it. But I don't see a whole lot of action. It just overwhelms me. That's one of my problems I notice. I can take on quite a bit, but when it all comes at once and I start to analyze it, there's so much analysis that has to go to keep straight. You got to keep it all straight. to work it through. It's like I start running out of RAM. I start having to run on my hard drive speed. It slows things down a lot. I can work it through, but man, it sure starts to take a long time by myself. Or if we had lots of people doing this, it's much easier to fly through this stuff if you understand the basic foundation. And if you don't, you're going to be a victim to all this stuff. We got all the proof we need to go after these people and stop the nonsense against us that's been brought up around us, all by the processes I've told you, and we do nothing. And then we complain. And I don't get that part either. And they keep encroaching. They keep encroaching. Why? They're an occupying force. They're an occupying system. They're not de jure at all. They're not. And if they were, you're not holding them to that level either. And so they make these encroachments, very serious threats against us. And I hear crickets. And then we come after it, and we go after the wrong things. I've been trying to show us. Let's go after it a little bit better. A very serious thing popped up that I didn't understand why. I think it's super serious. I don't know if anybody are more knowledgeable about this, what little bit I could look at. I think you folks in the Second Amendment condition, where you have an occupier taking away stealthily and over time, taking away all your ability to defend yourself, all your ability, even in the ultimate action. The Second Amendment is really has been underneath an attack, but the way they're doing it's very, very interesting. Right in everyone's face it's going down, and I don't think people are paying quite attention. I hadn't noticed this until it came through, and it was talked about more as a weapons ban, but then I started reading the underlying case, and this is not even a new thing that they've been encroaching on the Second. And so this brings up a very serious thing. What the occupying force really is taking you to task, and you aren't seeing it. No one stepping up and starting to be an affront and give the factual statement that precludes them, these people in these villages, whatever you call them, and these government and these courts, that you take away their power. No one's speaking in this regard. They're handing this whole thing over to you. So if you have an idea about the so-called Second Amendment, you think you can protect it, or you think that there's a law to protect it, I'm going to tell you I just ran across some stuff that has me really, really concerned. Really, really concerned. And maybe if you pay attention here, as the occupying force, you call your government, you call the professions, you call the agencies. This is just an occupying force. You know, like the Bar Association, primary, is right involved in this, because they're making that seated decision, aren't they? They're the final decision on this. I'm going to say it up front before I get to a couple of things. I'm still not sure where I've found that any court, the Supreme Court or any lesser court, has the right to interpret the extent of an infringement on shall not infringe. And this becomes important in looking at that, because what comes on in this case, this Deerfield case, it may give us an insight on how we're going to approach this. It's not going to go through a normal course. So I'm going to offer something here as I go reading through this. But again, as I show you, you look at the battlefield, you may have to pick a remedy that's not so direct to get what you want on a new theory. In other words, like we're doing the vaccine thing up front. You get all the facts, you get all the cases, and you pull it together. You start making sense of it yourself. You aren't limited by what's out. You are confined possibly to the battlefield that's been played, but your interpretation is not confined to that, and it may give you a clearer path than ever been brought forward that really is the untwisted form that we're all looking for. You may be the one that pulls that out. Deerfield bans assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Now, they're getting a lot of traction on this definition of assault weapon. That has to be addressed. High-capacity magazines is a number. I'm not going to even talk about that, because the bottom line is whether I call it an assault weapon and it's not or isn't, or the capacity of the magazine, what are they just allowed to have happen, but you are now banned. And we talked about some of this, that you have like 60 days or you're going to be a felon and have your stuff taken. You are being divested of your right to exercise the Second Amendment. And what happened in this case was a bit terrifying. That it was done by silence on the part of the Supreme Court. Owners of assault weapons living in northern suburban Deerfield have until June 13th to remove the firearms within village limits or face daily fines after the ban was approved Monday night. The village board of trustees unanimously approved a ban. A ban, folks. on certain types of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, amending the 2013 ordinance that regulated the storage of those items. The new ordinance prohibits the possession, sale, and manufacture of certain types of assault weapons, large-capacity magazines within the village, according to the ordinance. Once change from the law as it was originally discussed exempts retired police officers from the ban, according to the village manager, Kent Street. Well, that's enough. You're talking about penalties and all this. Why would the retired police officers get an exemption? I just told you before. You live under an occupying force. They're the soldiers. All their soldiers and their trained people get exempted. There's a definition, there's a proof of it right there, whether you want to recognize it or not. And so we're in a serious thing that they're now banning the weapon they're not supposed to infringe. And here's where the problem is. This went it was a place called Highland as well, or Parkland. No, Highland, I think it was. This issue's already been decided a couple years ago, and when that case went to the Supreme Court, they failed to hear an appeal. Now, the problem with the force and effect of that was that it bans the weapons, even though, as you heard in the first case, they didn't decide anything at the Supreme Court. And they'll tell you that. They didn't really decide to allow the ban. They just didn't hear the cause. Well, I've got a problem with that, because it's the force and effect of the failure to actually take to task the constitutional infringement that shall not be was what? Aiding and abetting the prohibition, the ban, that shall not be infringed. And so to me, that's by not taking that very important foundational constitutional issue, the justices that didn't take that case, and a couple of them wanted to, actually were derelict in their office. And so a question popped up in my mind about a challenge to that may have to come independent of a gun issue, would be the question to answer. Actually, in my mind, a quo warranto. Where is your authority, first of all, to infringe on that which shall not be infringed, but more importantly, to not actually take up a question where the failure to answer works, the force and effect of the failure to answer is an infringement? Where's your warrant in law under the Constitution, your duty to protect the lack of the sanctity of the lack of infringement? Where is your authority in law to stand down, essentially? Is, I think, one of these more unique ways to approach this. When I think about it, this is what comes to my mind. That I think those of you that are truly interested, this is a serious attack, this case, these set of cases. And what the court's doing, the Bar Association members are doing, is to take a step back on what they should be standing up to protect. My question was, and I think this could be reduced into a quo warranto, where's your authority to do that, to stand down where you have the duty to assert the law is not infringed, the prohibition against infringement? When they use the word ban, that on its face is a prohibition. At least, like we see that in mining, they at least have to give a regulated use. And they're now getting so bold as to openly ban it, and the Supreme Court says, okay, we're not going to even hear that. And the force of effect of which isn't a determination that it is an infringement, but it has the effect as to institute the ban, which you see working out. Town passes constitution, U.S. citizens given 60 days to turn in guns and become criminals. Now, on that title, I'm not going to get too technically specific in the general for this point, but this is now precipitating out upon those people the ban. Those of you that are there, I think you need to listen to the last few minutes of what I said. There's a couple more angles on that very same point, that you address this not as a Second Amendment, but affected on the warrant in law that the Supreme Court has the right to stand down where the standing down has the force and effect of infringing the Second Amendment. That is the lead. There's a couple more that come behind that. That you start to look at how you're going to manipulate those that are manipulating you, and they're silent. If you don't think that silence is consent and success, you just saw it right there. The ones having the duty to protect, to make sure this is a law and enforced, are the ones that stood down. Is a dereliction of office. And let me add something on that. Remember, these officials, these justices, are only valid in times of good behavior. If you can show the record that they weren't in good behavior at that point, they're not judges. Another avenue. Is it all going to work? I can't tell you, but I can tell you that there's a legitimate authority for what I'm telling you to do in the law. What its effect will be conditioned on the public awareness versus what the occupier thinks it can get away with. And I'm talking to you some pretty high-level integration of what I kind of do most of the time, and I'm only talking to you in this regard because on this broadcast this way, because I think you're looking at a very serious encroachment by silence of those that had the duty to settle this and not evade their duty. That's another evasion right there, you see. You can actually fight for those. If we had an army of these people, I can show you how to make a blizzard of problems for these people in paperwork. But it looks like you have to reset the Justice Department with your documentation. Because they're taking it away from you very stealthily. Supreme Court rejection of gun case considered a victory by Highland Park. This is the part of the ban. United States Supreme Court refusal Monday to take up the challenge of Highland Park's ban assault protects similar restrictions in Chicago and other parts of Illinois and sends a message that municipalities have the right to determine how to best protect their communities. What happened to your right to bear arms? And that shall not be a keep and bear. No, see, you're part of the village now. You're part of the common. You're part of the community. And the community protects itself against you. If you don't see how this works, I don't know what to say. It's really clear to me. This is a much more serious thing than I had thought before. I see a little article, a little part of this paragraph. The lack of action was a blow to the National Rifle Association and pro-gun advocates. The National Rifle Association is an association. It's not there to protect your rights. It's not going to do what you need to do. It's an agenda-driven consensus group. I don't know why anybody hasn't seen this. I know some of you know that. But I'm talking about you getting in the warfare in the trenches and start taking on a more unique approach because the way it's been working has been working the way they want. And understand the seated decisions involved here. What I've offered to you is you take out that seated decision. And when you get it on record, they don't have the duty to stand down and to assert. You also impliedly then get the fact that the Second Amendment right to keep and bear is to the individual, and they have to step up because it's that important. You've essentially proved your point. And if you understand how this starts to build the record that I've been telling you to build, when they start taking things away from you, how to reestablish that. And you do these essentially, quo warrantoes in a writ. You do it on the equity side with the infringement. You do it as a violation to you because it is a ban and not just a regulated use. You now start to bring it more to the point where the Supreme Court has to kind of engage it. I don't know why the Supreme Court didn't do it unless they want to bring on this agenda. They want your guns. Why? Because they're the occupying force. I think that there's tools in law to bring to bear to start to show everyone who doesn't have a clue what the clue is they're supposed to have. Anyway, so this is I looked at this very serious problem. This is, really a serious problem, what's being established at this point. You're going to have to look at this issue and find out what's going on with the Supreme Court, why they didn't take it, and you're going to have to make the case to get around that obstruction by their inaction. In a place that only takes 1% of the cases before it, which defines injustice to everybody. When you see that they overturn even one case in a circuit, that circuit's prone to error. That's not justice. And then you start to bring on, when you start showing these facts, you start showing that you can't trust the system. Now you've turned on the whole point that the judiciary was supposed to keep and install. They're now derelicting keeping your trust. That's another point. As I bring more of this on, it just keeps coming, folks. It's not so hard. So, getting on to so they're abdicating their liability to their oath to enforce the Constitution when they step back and allowed the ban. Now you use that as the cause to bring forward on a writ. How did you have the right to do that? Where was your warrant in law to allow the lack of addressing that to affect something that wasn't supposed to be infringed? That's a self-evident proof on its own. You probably won't get an answer, but the rules of equity would say, or the writ, because it's a writ of warranto, the burden's on them, and the failure to do that is actually concession. Again, their silence on that point confesses their wrong and their harm. I would take that and go back and invalidate the other part of it as well, and just keep pushing the record. Whether or not you agree with all this, it doesn't matter to me. That's how you have to do it. If you do nothing, then you got none of it. Nothing. You don't even have you have nothing to think about. Just your opinion clacking on the keyboard, and that's it. Now you turn around and you start getting active, you start showing people how best to do this, I think people will start getting invigorated about, well, they finally see how to do it. You become that lightning rod, that example, just by that example. And you don't get all wild, you don't get all nuts, and you don't get all opinionated. You go strictly from the black and white I keep telling you about, and there's no way to avoid that. There's no place for opinion. The opinion is how they take you out. So moving over to this, what is the system made to do and we haven't allowed it to do? What I've been telling you, the Supreme Court was mandated by its establishment and its purpose to make these calls about someone's encroachment on things that are not encroachable. And they were supposed to stand in the gap and stop it. And I've just pointed out that that system was designed to do that and it failed. That's a culpable liability. I was talking last week, and I'll move on to this, where the world coming on us is not going to be in a place that there is any liability and culpability attributable, because the system is not designed like that. And now we're talking about this thing called AI again. You might think that the whole system government right now is a big AI, and it somehow can be looked at. But now I'm talking about this digital world they've got in, where we're looking at, in the Constitution, that the courts are required to step in where they don't. It's dereliction, evasion of their duty by their oath, and all this other stuff you can throw in there. A line item. It's not on and on and on. You just make that statement, complaint, into the unreal world, the digitized world of non-culpability. Why? Because the system's not designed to do that. And I touched base at the close of last broadcast about these autonomous vehicles, that in the recent stories that we've been now seeing is a latent problem that I think people are going to have to be aware of. It's how the technocrats are moving this thing in. It's how they're going to be doing this without your ability to have a remedy against it. There was a car in Uber that hit someone at night walking across the road and killed her. In these stories, you start to find how the administrators, the bureaucrats, start to deal with these matters. And they come to the conclusion that when a machine is not designed to do something, it can't be held liable as a machine because it wasn't programmed to do that thing. So even if it kills you, it's not the cause. And I got three linkings. We go through the Arizona case. It goes back to the Tesla. There was a Tesla accident. It goes through the National Transportation Safety, how the regulators look at this. And it goes through, if you read those three or four here, it's four, different reports, and look very carefully, you'll see how the bureaucrats are deciding how this is going to work in the future. And you're going to see that unless a system was designed to do something, if your AI is not programmed to do what it's not supposed to do, if it harms anybody, anywhere, it can't be held liable, should be a problem for you. It is not an equality standard against you. In fact, it makes you the causative harm in this AI future. And so this is the problem I have also about AI. Even calling it AI is a fraud. It's a disservice to everybody. It's not AI. It's not an artificial intelligence. I don't think I can see a way that they can get there to artificial intelligence. They can do some digital magic. In fact, I predicted a logical function in an AI construction that ends up coming out in a movie I'm going to send you a link to, that they say right there what the function is, and the logical function was what I predicted before I even got to that point in the movie. In other words, the outcome of a decision that has to be made is simply a coded exclusive OR gate. And when you put the computer does that, it's a very fast function. So it's lightning fast, looks really impressive, but it's only coming out with what a programmer said it was supposed to come out with. In other words, that's outcome based. You're starting in consensus. You already got a felony going to start with. But you can predict what these computers are going to have to do in order to come to decisions. It's not artificial intelligence. That's logic programming. And so this artificial intelligence and these machines that are putting us among us are already being told they can't be viable, they can't be liable or culpable because they're not designed for us. It's not much different than you leaving open the cops without policy constraints and constructing how they're going to function. So when you don't have the constraint, when it goes to kill you, it's not held liable. Is your AI coming out now to do the same thing to us all? And now a lady's died. I was going to go through a little more of that story, but a lady's died in Arizona. Maybe you heard about that story. The car couldn't see it. I saw the video. I'll tell you what, I think actually the headlights were too low. You could not see this lady. This lady came out from nowhere. But this car should have been able to see it. But because it wasn't designed to see that, it was not held culpable, liable to the problem. It did not cause that accident. Not unlike what happened to Tesla car when that guy got run into a semi. The car was not designed to see that condition, and because it was not designed to see that condition, it could not be held to having to see the condition. And I think we're missing the point at that point. I want you to be aware, our systems have to be relating to reality, not the function of the machine. In other words, the policy standard will be, it has to be able to see that standard or it's culpable. You see how they turn this around on us. And we're not there to make that statement. I made a comment about this to, I think, Media Monarchy. It says here, notice Media Monarchy. The technology is not considered impaired. Neither the victim nor the backup driver showed any signs of impairment, Elcock said in one of the stories. And so this shows you only humans are defective. That's the only analysis that they made, was the two victims of this accident were not impaired. That's what I put hashtag sustainability. The victims nor the backup driver showed any signs of impairment. They were looked at the causative problem for being under the influence to cause the problem because the machine was not designed for the problem it caused. Has got to be a thought you better run through your brain because this is the way this whole thing works. It's a counterintuitive nonsense. The legalisms. It's because they don't have a policy up front of what the machines have to be built to meet. No different than your cops don't have a limit. You see your cops are running under artificial non-intelligence. It's just programmed response. Another comment came out. I believe autonomous vehicles are going to play a big role in traveling in our future, but the development of technology before improving city landscapes, infrastructure, and developing a movement pattern for cities to match, it will never succeed. And I come back and I say, correct. They will have to remove the defective human parts completely, but only gradually. And I give them a link of a New York Times article. If there is a defect identified, it's not enough to do a software update. Was one of the standards that when they can't do a software update to fix it, it wasn't designed, it can't be held culpable. When those machines kill you, you will have no remedy. Is your technocratic future. And these modal highways and corridors will eventually be set up that there will be no people in them. You, the human animal, you're the animal like a deer. You're the undesirable element. And you will have to be removed from this AI system, which is not artificial intelligence. It's got to be the biggest crime against people I know, is to call this stuff artificial intelligence. It's not. And I found, came up in the Twitter somehow or whatever, a video you could watch. I was just, I kind of get excited a bit too. I was yelling at the screen for probably 40 minutes in this thing. I couldn't handle what they were saying, all the mischaracterizations of it. But then after the 40 minutes, they started getting to the truth of it. It's called, Do You Trust This Computer? And so, notwithstanding my response and reactions to it, I think you need to see where this is all going. You need to incorporate what I've been just telling you when you watch this and get through the whole process and think about what they're showing us there. Think about the cautionary points that are being made. Think about how this culpability thing rolls out. Think about your place within that. I mean, my view of this, when I first saw the opening, it says, do you trust this computer or not? It's a computer screen. I would have clicked, no, I don't. I would have been out of the program pretty quick. I wouldn't have gotten to watch the rest of the movie if I had that actual choice. Anyway, so it's a movie and you get to watch it. But you listen very careful to what they're talking about. You listen very careful to what's being said. In fact, I highlighted a couple of conversations here that were made, 2 comments, one made by Dr. Herman. He's a surgeon doing a very delicate procedure, utilizing a very fantastic technology. I'm with the technology, but it's what it's used for and what we expect out of this stuff. He's doing surgeries he could never have done 10 years ago, but there's these limitations. And one of the limitations you'll find when you listen carefully is the exception. I want you to pay very close attention to the exception. That's the failure point. But he says this: the computer just does what it's supposed to do. And he knows that. He has to integrate that problem. It's not intelligent. For as fantastic as it looks like it's intelligent, it's not. It just does what it's supposed to do. Like that little microphage. Professor J. Kaplan stated, and this has been my point about this, the truth is machines are natural psychopaths. And it's not about the feelings that a computer will be thought to have. They are strictly executors of an instruction set. And as I hashtag on this, I state here, not artificial intelligence, but premeditated programmed performance. Hashtag exception intolerant. Hashtag you are an exception. Hashtag behind the woodshed. If you choose to take it. The human is the exception to the so-called AI environment that's placed in the real world. And it doesn't handle those exceptions really, really well. That's an however quality the programming will be, any exception will cause the harm that it will not be culpable to. And that harm usually will end up harming somebody, property, or death. And so this is not really to be trifled with. Fascinating movie to watch. Notwithstanding my responses to, I don't like the misinformation about how they talk to you, but they do explain to you the limitations, and we're walking just square in the face with all that. And this is not very exception tolerant, because you're talking about people's lives in an instant that are not programmed into a system that will not be held to its cause. And that is what we need to look forward in these policy-making considerations in any non-thinking entity organization, including and beyond hashtag blue is. We are going to have to really step up here and look, and we have to be the advanced thought to all these players and gamers in the system taking advantage of your silence and ignorance. It's what I've been saying all the time. It's like I think about this thing. I've been training for this day. We're here now, folks. It's no time to dally. No time to misdefine. It's no time to misinterpret. It's no time to give away the things that other people will take advantage of. And I can go on and on and on with this technology that's coming. I have tabs and tabs and tabs. I mean, I don't even know how many. I'm like up to 300 tabs. Tabs and tabs and tabs of integrating. I'm talking about integration. Integrating this entire thing together for you. And it won't matter anyway at the end if you do nothing with it. I'm wasting my time. You're wasting your time. It's not going to be it's not a sit-back situation. Right now, the system is in place to allow machines to come and hurt you without remedy. One. And that machine happens to be also looked at as your government. And those within that machine government, that unfeeling psychopathic caucustocracy. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope something I said gives you an understanding, gets you involved, really teaches you how to, gives you the steps to start to dig in better and build the realities for us. Grimner, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com. And Social Network, Freedom Network needs donations, folks. Minds and BitChute, thank you for all the support there, and YouTube, wherever we get it. Appreciate it. UCY.TV in particular, simulcasting this broadcast live on to recast it on Thursday and daily on the UCY network and its own website for YouTube. And I'll be here next week, tech diffs or nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.